Now we talk about business ethics. Here we have four section objectives. Number one, to distinguish between business ethics and social responsibility of business. Two, to recognize the relationship between business law and business ethics. Three, to analyze business decisions using the WH framework. And four, to explain the theories of business ethics. Now, ethics are simply moral principles and values as they're applied to social behavior. It's like that battle of what's right and what's wrong that all of us have on a daily basis. That being said, business ethics are the application of moral and ethical principles in a business context, right? More specifically, right, when you're operating your business, what's right, what's wrong, what should you do? Now, most companies face something called an ethical dilemma, right? It's a problem concerning the firm, or specifically what a firm should do when there's no clear answer. Something may be legal in the United States, but legal in another country like Mexico, like selling these dolls, right? In the United States, we have very strict, very stringent laws designed to protect children from getting hurt while playing with toys. In other countries, the laws are different. Now, what's the ethical dilemma? If a toy will hurt a child in one place, wouldn't that toy hurt a child in another place? Where does the dilemma arise? The company's invested millions of dollars in developing this toy and marketing this toy. If they can't sell it, they lose the money. They lose their profits. Potentially, they go bankrupt. Why ethical awareness is important to you. Acting ethically is the right thing to do, but it's not always easy. Often, conforming to a high standard of conduct is not absolutely clear cut, right? There is no right decision, there is no wrong decision, and frequently, it's simply choosing between the lesser of two evils. Some decisions require that you prioritize between choosing competing ethical values and principles, right? An example of that might be you go to your grandmother's house for dinner, and she's worked really hard to prepare this dinner for you, right? You want to make your grandmother happy. That's the duty of a child, to please a parent or a grandparent, right? But the food sucks. And when your grandmother asks you, "Oh, baby, how does it taste?" Here's the dilemma. Do you tell her the truth and hurt her feelings, or do you lie and spare her feelings? There's no clear-cut answer. What's right, what's wrong? Ethical decision-making is based on core character values like trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and good citizenship. Ethical decisions generate ethical behaviors and provide a foundation for not just good business practices, but also for good personal practices. Why is studying business ethics important? Well, first, profit maximization is a goal of all businesses, right? It's basically the ability for a company to achieve a maximum profit with a low operating expense. Second is the rise of corporate citizenship. Corporate citizenship is defined as the company's role or responsibility towards societies. Now, if we look at both of these individually, you look at profit maximization as a goal. If you make bad ethical decision, it could potentially lead to lawsuits, which cost money. If you make bad ethical decisions, it could potentially lead to bad public relations, which cost you money. If you make bad ethical decisions, it could impact adversely on how your community sees your role in their society is, right? So it's very important to figure out how to navigate all these difficulties. Now, business ethics and social responsibility, right? when you talk about social responsibility, who are we dealing with? Right? Well, basically four sectors. Your community, right? And there, you're looking to be socially accountable and make a social investment. Your workplace, right? And you're looking at ethics as it relates to human resources, working conditions, treatment of employees. The environment, well, environmental protection, right, is very, very important in the 21st century, right? We are seeing that our resources, many are non-renewable, right? And they're doing great harm to the country, if not the planet, right? So how does a business respond to that? And then marketplace, right? We talk about corporate governance and economic responsibility. Now, when you talk about corporate governance, this is how a corporation views its role in relation to its consumers, in relation to its suppliers, right? In relation, all right, to basically just good business practices, telling the truth, making good products. The social responsibility of business is the responsibility of firms doing business within a community to meet the expectations that the community imposes on them. Right? One of the things that you may have noticed, right, in recent years is that companies are being held more accountable, not just for what they produce, but for what they say, but for how they act, but for the impact of their actions. You know, think about these companies where you'll have a company spokesman make a bad statement. I think Fox News right away, Tucker Carlson's writer, was on blogs making racial and homophobic statements, right? Got some backlash. What did Fox do? They had to fire him, right? This happens time and time again, right? The community imposes certain expectations on companies, and if companies don't live up to that, right? Let's look at Facebook, right? Which recently got in trouble for allowing racist rhetoric on its platform, right? Facebook didn't do anything about it. What was the impact? Advertisers started pulling out. We look at the Redskins, the Washington Redskins, who for years, Native Americans have been asking them to change the name because they found the name Redskins to be offensive, right? They said they would not change the name. The community, led by FedEx in this instance, said, if you do not change the name, we will not sponsor you, right? So the community has expectations as to how you will act, right? And that is part of the social responsibility of all businesses. The importance of ethics in making business decisions. Number one, the legal implications of each decision a business makes. Firms are always subject to the implicit threat that legislation will impose social obligations on them, right? If they make bad decisions, it could lead to lawsuits, and the lawsuits lead to the government stepping in. Now, one of the things that you should be aware of, when you self-regulate, when you try to do the right thing, you probably put less restrictions on yourself than when the government gets involved, because the government tends to take an overbroad view, right? A government tends to take an approach where they make sure that any possibility, even things that may never come up, are covered in their legislation. Number two, the public relations impact of unethical decisions. Firms acting outside of prevailing ethical norms risk ill will and damage to their reputations, profits, and continued existence. I just cited a few examples. Facebook, Fox News, the Washington Redskins, right? When the Washington Redskins started, as we stated, you know, the term Redskin, while somewhat derogatory, didn't garner the kind of negative perception that it does today, right? They started in the days when folks played Cowboys and Indians, and we had the Westerns all on TV. But times have changed. People don't accept you marginalizing other communities. The Washington Redskins, as I said, didn't want to change, right? Prevailing social norms forced them to change because FedEx said they would pull out. Safety risks for consumers and employees. If a company decides to cut corners in manufacturing products, maybe not having the proper equipment in the factory, they could injure their employees. If they use the wrong products in manufacturing a product, they could injure consumers. All right, think about when Baby Gap several years ago got in trouble because they bought some children's clothing from China, and the paint used on the zippers on these toddler clothes was lead-based. Right now, everybody knows that lead poisoning is a very serious thing, and when you're dealing with little kids, anything you give them, what do? They put it in their mouth. Right? By being unethical, by cutting corners, by saving money, they created a safety risk to their customers. Finally, financial implications. If you just look at the three issues up above, legal implications of each decision. When you get sued, what does that cost you? It costs you money. Public relations, right? Negative public relations impact, that costs you profits. What are profits? Money. Continued existence, loss of profits, money. Safety risks for consumers, employees, right? Two things once again, potential lawsuits and potential government oversight, which could be costly, right? So there's always a financial implication to the decisions that businesses make, and that's why they should do their best to be ethical. Now, what exactly is the relationship between the law and ethics? Law and business ethics serve as an interactive system, informing and assessing each other. Business ethics builds on law. Business law provides a floor for business ethics, telling business leaders the minimal accepted course of action. Now, I want to emphasize this, the minimal accepted course of action. Now, we call this the moral minimum, and this is the minimum level of ethical behavior expected by society, right? Now, this generally is just compliance with the law, right? That's the basement standard, right? You cannot go any lower than this, but you can go much higher. Consider the food industry, consider the FDA. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, right, specifies how clean food must be. It specifies what waste material percentage of and animal parts, insect parts can be in the food we consume. That is the moral minimum, right? If a company that produces food has any more than that, they've broken the law, right? If they have less than that, that's great. That's the moral minimum. Now, what are our approaches to ethical reasoning? The first one is going to be duty-based ethics. Duty-based ethics are ethical philosophies rooted in the idea that every person has certain duties to others, including humans and the planet. What are the sources of duty-based ethics? Well, first, we have religious ethical principles. We have to start off with the principle of rights. This is a belief that a key factor in determining if a business decision is ethical is how that decision affects the rights of others. Now, I think from a business standpoint, an issue that comes up with decisions that businesses make are conflicting rights. Conflicting rights. I think that's what they worry about most of all, right? If business X does Y, what happens to business Z? Second is resolving those conflicts, right? What is the course of action that a business needs to take to resolve potential conflicts? Next, we have the Kantian principles. Immanuel Kant said, people are not a means to an end. He created something called the categorical imperative, right? This is an ethical guideline developed by Immanuel Kant under which An action is evaluated in terms of what would happen if everybody else in the same situation or category acted the same way. Now, from my perspective, I think this applies more to people on a personal level. I don't think that businesses really rely on the Kantian principles very much, except for one situation, which is universality, which we'll talk about briefly. But for the most part, I think that most businesses believe that people are in fact a means to an end. And what's that means? They're a means to profits, right? If you give the consumer something that they want, or you create a need or desire for a product, right, they make you rich, right? And I think the question that they have is, what would happen if everybody else in the same situation or category behaved the same way? I don't know that they consider that. I think they consider, how can I get to market first? So I think this one more applies to you in your personal life, but not so much in your business life. Now, how are ethical decisions made? That's a real big question for businesses, right? Because as we stated, the ethical dilemma states that sometimes there is no clear-cut right or wrong answer, right? And you're basically balancing between conflicting choices and conflicting issues. So how do businesses make ethical decisions? Well, first, all ethical decision making requires businesses to, one, recognize an ethical issue. The ethical issue could be, could this decision or situation be damaging to someone or to some group? Does this decision involve a choice between good or bad alternatives, or perhaps between two goods or two bads, right? Sometimes there are two good choices, one is better. Sometimes there are two bad choices, one is just worse. Is this issue about more than a legal issue, or is it about what's most efficient? And if so, how? The second thing that has to be done is you've got to get the facts. What are the relevant facts of the case? What facts are not known? How can I learn more about the situation? How do I know I have enough information to make a decision? What individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? Are some concerns more important than others? Then why? When you think about competing concerns, it might be the government versus consumers. If it's something with resources, could it be the mining of the resource versus the needs of the consumers? What are the options for acting? Have all relevant persons and groups been consulted? Have identified creative options? Sometimes companies make a mistake of not talking to all the groups that are involved, and sometimes if you sit and you listen to people, they can help you come up with solutions to your ethical dilemmas. Sometimes you have to be creative. Number 3, you have to evaluate alternative actions. Evaluate the options by asking the following questions. Which option will produce the most good or do the least harm? Right? This is utilitarianism. Which option best represents the rights of all who have a stake? This is the rights approach. Which option treats people equally or proportionally? This is the justice approach. Which option best serves the community as a whole and not just some members? The common good approach. Which option leads me to act as a sort of person I want to be? The virtue approach. Each approach has its merits. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I cannot tell you which approach to use because ethics are personal and only you can determine which approach works best for you. Number 4, you have to make a decision and test it. Considering all approaches, which option best address the situation? If I told someone I respect or told a television audience which option I've chosen, what would they say? Now you think about this. That puts you in pretty good stand if you tell somebody, if you told your grandmother, what would she say? If you told your dad, what would he say? Right? That gives you a clue as to whether you're on the right track. Act and reflect on the outcome. How can my decision be implemented with the greatest care and attention to the concerns of all shareholders? Right? This is the how. How do I do it? How do I do it? How did my decision turn out? And what have I learned from this specific situation? Now, in the military, we call this an after-action review. Every time you take an action, whether it is successful or fails, you can learn something from it to make your next action better, right? An after-action review, critical, critical, critical. Now, let's talk about specific modalities of ethical decision making, right? We have to start off with the WH framework for business ethics. WH stands for Who-How. The Who-How framework for business ethics is normally utilized in making ethically sound decisions and require general consideration of 2 primary factors. Factor number 1 is stakeholders, and factor number 2, the way the action will be conducted. Now, the who are the stakeholders? Stakeholders include consumers, owners or investors, shareholders, management, employees, and the community. Now, one group that frequently is left out are future generations, right? You take an action today, and it could have an impact on people who've not yet been born, right? We think about petroleum products. We think about non-renewable sources of energy and what it takes to get them. I think about the fracture mining, where they basically pump water into the ground to make oil come up, right? What impact does it have on the environment down the road, right? But these are the who's, and each one of these groups has a stake in your decision. H stands for how, right? These are the guidelines, how you do it, right? This is your plan. The plan might be public disclosure. You tell the public what's going on. Universalization, or the golden rule. Now, what's public disclosure? Public disclosure is a situation in which information that was formerly not known to the general public is willingly presented or disclosed to the populace. Sometimes if you tell people what's going on, oops, I made a mistake, that's the right thing to do, because they can take a course of action that prevents them from being harmed. Next is the golden rule. The golden rule is the principle of treating others as you want to be treated. We've all heard this as do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It is a maxim that is found in many religions and cultures. It can be considered an ethic of reciprocity in some religions, although other religions treat it differently, more as a duty, right? You treat your father as you would want your son to treat you. It's your duty, your obligation. Now, there's 6 ways that the golden rule can be interpreted. Do to others as you want them to gratify you. Be considerate of others' feelings as you want them to be considerate of yours. Treat other persons of rational dignity like you. Extend brotherly or sisterly love to others as you'd want them to do to you. Treat others according to moral insight as you would have others treat you. And do as God wants you to do to them. Now, once again, please bear in mind that the golden rule, right, is found in many religions, right? And these statements reflect that directly. And I can't emphasize this enough, right? When we talk about ethics, ethics are personal. It depends on what you were taught, how you perceive things, the environment that you live in, and the culture that you come from, because ethics are fluid, right? And I have to keep emphasizing to say, when it comes to ethics as a general rule, there is no wrong or right. There's only what you believe as a general rule. There are some exceptions which are clear-cut and black and white. We know that murder is bad. We know that rape is bad. We know that robbery is bad. But with that said, even 2 out of the 3 that I mentioned, murder and robbery, are they always bad? The answer is no, right? Think about war, right? If it is state sanctioned, and I'm talking about a military conflict, if it furthers a greater good, then an act that is wrong in one situation is good in another. So ethics are very, very fluid. Remember that, remember that, remember that. Now, my favorite version of ethical decision making with regard to businesses is utilitarianism, which is outcome-based ethics. Outcome-based ethics. This is the doctrine that actions are right if they're useful or beneficial for the majority. Actions are right if they are useful or beneficial for the majority. Now, utilitarianism requires that you conduct a cost-benefit analysis. One, there's a determination of which individuals will be affected by the action in question. 2, you do the cost-benefit analysis, which requires an assessment of the negative and positive alternative actions on these individuals. And 3, you choose among the alternative actions the action that produces the maximum societal utility. And this means provides the greatest good for the greatest number of affected people. Right? This tends to be the way businesses make their decisions. Right? The greatest good for the greatest number of affected people. Right? That works really, really well for businesses for the most part. Right? Because as we say, a lot of times, there is no good choice. Might be 2 bad choices, with one being less bad. One of the things that I always think about with utilitarianism and doing a cost-benefit analysis is Mattel, when they created the Cabbage Patch dolls. These are some little ugly deformed dolls that all these little kids fell in love with, and it was a phenomenon, right? Back when we had the Toys R Us at Times Square, they actually had a Cabbage Patch where all the dolls were displayed, and when you go and pick your doll, the salesperson would have the child fill up an adoption form, right? So they were adopting their baby, and a lot of little kids treated these dolls just like they were real kids, fell in love with them. Mattel had a runaway success. What'd they do? The market was saturated. Everybody who wanted a Cabbage Patch doll had bought one. The kids were also a little bit older. They were starting to be a little more interactive with their toys. So Mattel goes back to the drawing board, and they create a doll, Cabbage Patch 2.0. This doll, not only can you hug and kiss, but you can feed the doll and change the doll. And the way they did this was that they created a mechanism in the doll's mouth where when you fed it these little French fries that came with the doll, it would grab them and eat them, and they go in the doll's belly. And then when all the French fries are gone, you could change your baby by taking his clothes off, opening up the hatch in the back, taking the fries out, and then dressing your baby. It was very interactive, like feeding and changing a baby. Now, this was fantastic for Mattel, except they made a couple of mistakes. First mistake they made was in the size of the French fries, right? They were the exact same size as little fingers. Second mistake, which goes along with these fries, and the mechanism that would grab these fries, was the fact that the mechanism was automatic. When something would touch it, it would grab and pull. Well, some little kids playing with these dolls had long hair. When they would hug their babies, this mechanism would grab their hair and rip it out. Other little kids, maybe the ones with short hair, were inquisitive as to where the fries were going, and they would stick their fingers into the mouth trying to see, and this mechanism would grab these little fingers and sometimes tear the skin. After this happened to several children, multiple complaints, the toys were pulled from the market because they violated child safety laws in the United States. Mattel was not allowed to sell the dolls here. Now, going back to that slide 1, or slide 3 actually, where I got the Cabbage Patch doll, illegal in the United States, legal in Mexico. What do you do, Mr. CEO? You're $25 million in the hole with the development and marketing of these dolls. Another $5 million to recall these dolls. $30 million in the hole. How do you recoup that? How do you make the best of this? Or from my perspective, you have exactly 3 courses of action. You could destroy the dolls, you could modify the dolls, or you could sell the dolls somewhere else. All right, those are your choices. Now the question is, who's affected by whatever choice you make? Well, we start off with your consumers, the people that buy the dolls, play with the dolls, the children and their parents. Then you have to think about your shareholders, the people that actually own the company, right? Because you've got a safety versus profit issue going. Then you think about management and employees, right? Potentially losing their jobs. And you think about the impact of the company closing. What impact would that have on the community? Right? Mattel is a pretty big store. How many businesses provide service to Mattel? How many people in the community in which the factory is located will be out of work if the factory had to close? All right, so we look at alternative number 1. You destroy the dolls, you eat the money. $30 million down the hole. What would you have to do to please the shareholders? You'd have to get the money back somewhere. One of the easiest ways to get money back is you start laying off workers, right? You might break even if you lay off enough workers, get that $30 million back because you save it on salaries and benefits. Break even may be okay for the investors. Destroying the dolls would definitely be okay for the consumers because nobody gets damaged anymore, nobody gets hurt. But it wouldn't be so good for the employees, in which management is included, right? They would lose their jobs. You could sell the dolls in another country, but then you have the same problem. If a doll would injure a child in the United States, it would definitely injure a child somewhere else. And you could say, well, it's not my problem. If that country cared about their kids the way we care about kids here, they'd have laws to protect them. But here's the thing. 30 years ago, that might have worked, but in 2020, we got the internet. If a little kid in Mexico had her finger bitten off by a Cabbage Patch doll, that would be on the news. What would that do to Mattel stock? It would go down, go down, go down. So I don't know if that would work, but you could try it. Option number 3, as I stated, was you could retrofit the dolls. You could recall them, you could fix the problem, and try and sell them again. Basically, this would cost you more money with no guarantee that the consumers will come back. You're already $30 million in the hole. You might be another 10 or a total of $40 million in the hole, right? And unable to sell these dolls. Your investors would not be happy. Which choice is best? I can't answer that question for you. If it was me, I would destroy the dolls. Now, I know you're saying, but you lose all that money. Yes, 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 I would. However, I would destroy the dolls on Thanksgiving in Central Park right after the Macy's Day Parade, Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. I would do it in front of every media outlet I could find. And I do it by having a great big pit dug in Central Park. I put all the dolls in the pit and I'd set them on fire. And then I would say, at Mattel, we care more about children than we do about profits. Now I know you're saying, what good would that do? I want you to think about the marketing coup. Everybody watches the Thanksgiving Day parade. Last person in the parade is who? Santa Claus. What does he signal to children and parents? It's time to go shopping for toys. Now, if I just burnt up $30 million because I care about your kids, what does that say about how I care about what I make for your kids? Where you might have bought one Mattel toy, now you're gonna buy 5. Right? I've made my company a fortune. I'm a hero. It's not that I'm a good person. It's that that was the best option that I saw. You may see something different because, as I said, ethics are personal. Let's talk about primary values and business ethics. What's a primary value? Our first one is freedom. Freedom to act without restriction from rules imposed by others. To possess the capacity or the resources to act as one wishes. To escape the cares and demands of this world. That's freedom. That's one of the values that most people, particularly in this country, hold as being sacred. Another value is security. To possess a large enough supply of goods and services to meet basic needs. To be safe from those wishing to interfere with your prosperity rights, with your property rights. To achieve the psychological condition of self-confidence to such an extent that risks are welcome. Now, for me, this just boils down to an individual or company feeling like they're covered, like they have some wiggle room. That's what security means for me. We also have justice as a primary value. Justice to receive the products of your labor. That means you're compensated for your time and your efforts. Justice to treat all humans identically, regardless of race, class, gender, age, and sexual preference. We call that equality. To provide resources in proportion to need. We call that communism. That was a joke, right? This is just a basic justice need. If you have more and there are resources, you can get them. To possess anything that someone else is willing to grant you. Once again, supply and demand. Efficiency, to maximize the amount of wealth in society, to get the most from a particular output, and to minimize costs. Right? This is the goal of every business. Right? Maximize output, minimize costs, maximize profits or wealth. Now, finally, we have to talk about corporate social responsibility, what it actually means, how it actually works. It's the idea that corporations can and should act ethically and be accountable to society for their actions. Unfortunately, many corporations don't feel that applies to them, which is why the government did in fact have to step in with agencies like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, with agencies like OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, with agencies like the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which regulates how companies interact with society and sets that moral minimum that we talked about. Now, what's the social aspect of corporate social responsibility? The social aspect is a consideration that corporations are repositories of resources. They have finances, they have expertise, they have management skills. and they have the ability to tackle some of the issues that go on in a community. What's the corporate aspect of corporate social responsibility? Well, that the corporation has a duty to its stockholders to maximize profits, and the view might be that they're above getting involved in the community. And these two interests are competing, right? They're competing. Right now, when you look at the social aspect of corporate social responsibility, because they take away from society, they have a duty to give back. Now, in my mind, when you merge the social aspect and the corporate aspect of corporate social responsibility, right, you found this little nexus, this place where things just seem to work out. When I was a kid growing up on 110th Street, we had something called the West Side Pee Wee League. And in the West Side Pee Wee League, all of the local business owners would participate. They would sponsor a team. They'd buy you your jerseys. They'd pay the fees to the city for the fields. They'd buy us equipment. And on the back of the jersey would be the name of the store that was sponsoring you. Well, they were giving back to society, right? They were solving a problem. You had kids with nothing to do. You had families that may have had limited resources, right? And they were looking out for their community, right? For the future generations, for future customers, right? That was a social aspect. Now, from a corporation's point of view, why was that a good thing? Well, we call that public relations. We call that PR. We call that marketing, right? You know, you think about this. If the local liquor store is paying for your son's softball equipment and his softball league, when it's time for you to buy a bottle of champagne to celebrate their victory, where are you going to buy it? You're going to buy it at that liquor store. Same thing with the local florist and the local supermarkets. It worked really well, right? A real big example of the merging on a larger scale would be the Ronald McDonald House, right? And the Ronald McDonald House is located outside of Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York City. And any person who has a child undergoing any sort of cancer treatment, the Ronald McDonald House is basically a hotel that puts them up free of charge for the entire time of their child's treatment. That's giving back to society. Following up on that, what else does McDonald's do? They offer scholarships. What else does McDonald's do? They offer opportunities for women and minorities, right, to buy franchises, right, with training and at a discounted price, right? That's giving back to the community to level the playing field. Now, stakeholders, once again, you keep hearing this term, right? A stakeholder is any group affected by corporate decisions, right? The community, society is a stakeholder. Now, ethical leadership, is it important? I'd have to say beyond a doubt, it definitely is very important. The attitudes of top management set the stage for corporate culture. If you've got an honest CEO, you tend to have an honest company. If you've got a corrupt CEO, you tend to have a corrupt organization. Not one to be political, but let's look at the White House, and let's look at all of our secretaries, our cabinet level officers, and let's think about the scandals that have come to forward each one of them, right? Well, when the commander-in-chief is not behaving in an ethical manner at all times, it gives permission to those below him to behave the same way. Conversely, when we've had ethical commanders-in-chief, you had less scandal, less corruption. It was still there because some people just can't help themselves, but it was much less. Now, misbehavior by owners and managers, as I just stated, right, tends to empower those beneath them to misbehave as well. Now, one of the ways that you can ensure that your employees behave ethically, right, is through training, right? That's why when you get a new job, the HR departments usually have some sort of employee training where they teach you your job and they go over the do's and the don'ts, and they also give you an employee handbook. Most of the time, they tell you what the penalties for not following the rules will be. Sarbanes-Oxley Act and web-based reporting systems. Sarbanes-Oxley, SORBOX or SOX, is the United States federal law that set new or expanded requirements for all U.S. public company boards, management, and public accounting firms. Basically, it required transparency It required transparency. They were under the microscope, right, to help prevent corporate corruption. Now, as I said, ethics is very, very personal. It varies from person to person. You have to trust yourself and the situation to determine the right course of action.